Never. If anything, it's stronger than ever. I doubt religion more than ever because I've spent the last 15 years, since 2008-ish, yeah, roughly the last 15 years, constantly researching the origin and evolution of religious beliefs. So, if anything, my atheism is stronger, and my doubt for Christianity in particular is even stronger.
Okay, cool. I'll get to a question for that later on. So what made you desire to join this organization, the Atheist Alliance?
I was invited in because I had already written a book documenting it was directed against the American Christian right, who are trying to push creationism into the classroom, and that evolution is the devil's fairy tale. So it was a social commentary directed against those propositions, and so I'd already published that book. Um, and then another atheist author who was in the organization invited me and thought I would be uh, good for to manage the blog, which is what I started doing when I first got there. I was basically the manager of the blog, so I would review and edit blog posts and then make sure they got up on the site.
Mm, okay. And what's like the overall goal, do you think, for you in this organization?
I don't have
Or
a
I guess
goal. Just
a
it's
goal.
just what can I help? Can I be a contribution to making life better for somebody who's suffering? We are currently the main focus of AAI has pivoted in the last few years. That we're really reaching out to help a lot of ex-Muslims. These people they're in cultures that it's very dangerous to be a non-believer. Even if
Mhm.
even atheists, if you're a Muslim, ex-Muslim, and you're living in the US or the UK, if you have an extremist family, it can still be very, very dangerous for these people. Um, so if we can help somebody, get out of a dangerous situation, that's reward in and of itself. I don't need anything else beyond knowing that I helped somebody in this life.
Yeah. And were you able to, have you been able to make good friends in the organization, whatnot, good lasting relationships?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm best friends with all these people, but I mean, last year I went traveling. It was my first time to Canada in 12 years. And I crashed with a couple of people from the organization, like the past president. I crashed at his house. Another past president lived in the same city, and she picked us up and drove us, did the tourist thing and drove us to the airport. So quite friendly.
Okay, this one's obviously completely hypothetical for you, but if God came down here and said, I will answer one question out of all questions you have, what do you think you would ask?
Well, that's presuming that he does exist. So
Yeah, that's why I said it
if
was a
if
hypothetical for
yeah,
you.
if he did exist, obviously, and that's one of the memes that you see on social media, that
Sure.
like all it would take for atheism was just one bit of proof. So yeah, so obviously any atheist on meeting God would no longer be an atheist. That goes without saying. What would I ask him? I personally, because I'm a huge astronomy geek, and I love cosmology, so I would probably want to know what happened before the Big Bang.
Oh.
So, and certain cosmologists are positing. Like I read an interesting article or book within the last couple of years that said they're actually rethinking the Big Bang, that it wasn't a singularity, like that finite point in space and time that just then exploded with all of that matter. That there was a field of energy permeating like the fabric of the universe, and then it suddenly spontaneously converted, because energy converts to matter and matter converts to energy, right? Like E equals mc squared. That there was this energy field that just spontaneously converted to matter, and that was the what we would call the Big Bang, was that moment of conversion. So how long that field of energy was there, is it another universe collapsing, creating a new Big Bang? Who knows? So I would like to know about the origins of the universe and the Big Bang and what came before. That would be pretty cool.
Are you a Sean Carroll fan?
Sean, I know the name, but I can't place it.
Yeah, he's like a big time cosmologist. He actually has debated Christians, and he also goes on a podcast called Lex Friedman. Are you aware of that podcast?
No.
Yeah, I think you'd
Yeah,
like him a lot.
I've heard the name, but like I'm not really into podcasts. Like
Okay.
the only podcast I actually listen to is Neil deGrasse Tyson's Star Talk. That's like about the
Hmm.
only one I actually listen to with any regular, you know, viewing
Sean was on an episode of that, I believe.
on deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean the name is familiar, but yeah, I mean I listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson. Um, who's the other one? There's another Brian, I want to say Brian Green, but that's maybe not right. He's a big cosmologist as well. So yeah, I
Okay.
love space. Like if I wasn't, doing what I was doing, like when I was in high school, I wanted to be an astrophysicist, but I suck at math. So
Okay. And then there's another space question coming up later on. But so if you had to choose, do you think there's like any argument for God's existence that you're like, okay, this is
no,
at least something?
no,
Okay.
I don't. Any argument, any ontological argument, has been soundly disproven time and time again.
Okay. And then I assume you believe Jesus Christ existed, but just a wise teacher?
Yeah, but I did an AI podcast, oh, probably within the last 2, 3 months with a couple of guys who've done some research in the U.S. And they had some interesting points that Nazareth does not show up in any map or reference materials in the first century. Nazareth does not appear on maps or documents until the second century. So that was interesting. I'd never heard that before. So
Hmm.
they, I mean, I know there's the Jesus is myth camp, um, and they have some compelling arguments, but I tend to be in the same camp as Bart Ehrman. Like where there's smoke, there's
Yeah.
fire. There was probably a man at the heart of the stories that developed around him. So I personally think that there was, and whether it was an amalgamation, like that's some of the points they make, that the character of Jesus is an amalgamation of multiple apocalyptic prophets in first century Palestinian Judaism. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, I think there's enough smoke that for there to be fire. I think he probably was a real person. Yeah, and maybe one day, as scholarship, as we find more documents, things get discovered in libraries or dug up in the deserts of India or Egypt. So who knows what might come up in the next, say, 50 years.
Okay, cool. And would you prefer if Christianity was true, or if would you even prefer if there was a God?
No, not at all. I think the God as he's portrayed in the Bible and in the Quran is a horrible person. I was reading one of my books recently. Can't remember who it was. Yeah, they were talking about like the Old Testament God is is really quite a prick. He's misogynistic. He's genocidal. The New Testament God is obviously much more calm. But yeah, I think Christianity's granted, yes, Christianity as Jordan Peterson points out, the Western ethic. So there's some argument for the Western ethic, but I think in total, I think Judeo Christianity has what's the word? I think it was Christopher Hitchens, like terribly retarded humanity was the way he phrased it.
Were you a big fan of his?
Oh yeah. He died just as I was finishing my first book, that the social commentary on the American Christian right. So I dedicated it to him because he died just as I
Yeah.
was wrapping it up. So
Yeah, because what kind of cancer did he have? Do you
I
remember?
think he I think he had lung cancer. I mean, he was he smoked quite profusely. So
And then what amount of evidence would convince you?
well, God would kind of have to show up, wouldn't he?
Okay. And then based on your past experiences, have you had a overall good, bad, or neutral experience with Christians in your life?
I would say overall good. That's like when I became an atheist, of course the narrow-minded Christians, their standard playbook. Oh, you must have been abused, or you had a negative experience, or my favorite, you weren't a real Christian. I'm like, yeah, okay. Um, but yeah, I mean, I never had a negative experience at church. I wasn't Catholic, I wasn't abused. I wasn't a molested altar boy. For me, going to church was, was about hanging out with my friends, like in Sunday school, and having the fellowship after the sermon with cookies and coffee and playing in the church gym. So it wasn't overly negative. I mean, I've had negative experiences with Christians, but I mean, they're few and far between. So
Cool. Then I guess same question, but with general theists.
yeah, I mean, generally, I just feel sorry for them. That they're and like and it's funny because I look and I think it's true of most atheists. We kind of look back at our time as a theist and think, how the hell did I believe that? And we tend to be a little, I don't know if it's embarrassed, but there's definitely some cognitive dissonance there, like at the amount of malarkey that we swallowed without question. So I would say I tend to feel sorry for theists, rather than, angry with them just because they're so mentally boxed in that, they can't see beyond their religious indoctrination.
Yeah. And then I know you mentioned this through email about a woman was pressing you on a TV program, because this next question
Yeah,
kind of relates to, have you
yeah.
in recent years been in an aggressive debate or discussion with a theist?
It wasn't a debate. That was a TV program. She was an apologist and she was a TV presenter, and she was doing a piece for the local news station on near-death experiences. So she interviewed me. She'd originally come to the president of our local atheist society, and he said, "No, you should get to Jason. Jason's the writer and the researcher. Talk to him." And he warned me though, like he had a sense that this girl was not being forthcoming. I was actually thinking about that earlier and that episode, and it was basic selective reporting. She did not. She had come to do that piece with an apologist agenda. She discounted everything in my interview. She took one soundbite of me that was relevant to her pushing her agenda, and that was when I said, based on my own research on near-death experiences, basically a quote from, I think it was a neurologist, that said, to a person having a near-death experience, it is neurologically real for them. It's occurring in their brain chemistry. Neurologically, it's real for them. And that's the only quote she took from me. Like all of the stuff debunking near-death experiences, she didn't even use. And it was complete selective reporting. It was not legitimate journalism. It was a hit piece, to push her agenda on the local news. But I would say debates now, I don't really tend to debate. I mean, I've had some evangelical friends who I've they've gotten upset, at me like trying to get them to see the light. So so like, one of my friends is a fairly devout evangelical, and I'm like, you try to give them the facts and they just ignore it, and they just get upset when you point out that what they believe is faulty.
Okay. And then how do you feel about death?
I like to quote Epicurus, the Greek philosopher from the third century BCE. It's quite common at secular humanist funerals. I was not. I am. I am not. I do not care. So think about, like, before you were born, you have no conscious memory of before you were born. Death will be the same thing. It's just you come out of darkness, you go back into darkness. That doesn't scare me.
Cool. And then when it comes to exorcisms, do you believe that that's all a lie from the exorcist, or do you think it's just some kind of natural explanation, natural
No,
phenomenon explanation?
I think the Catholic Church should be brought up on charges. I think that, these people need proper psychological counseling, or probably like in-depth psychiatric care, if not hospitalization. I think the Catholic Church, if they believe that demons are operating in the world, I think, and the other thing is, how come exorcisms only happen to Catholics? Like, how come non-Catholics never get possessed? Shouldn't that be a big telling indicator?
Uh, I've I've heard, oh, I guess I've read, and this is all testimony of people,
Yes,
non-Catholics alike.
anecdotal.
Yeah, yeah, of cases of people that aren't Catholic getting it, even Muslims facing it, but then having to call on a Catholic exorcist. But the next one, is there any type of specific behavior amongst the atheist community you wish would stop?
I I'm not really aware of it because I don't live in the U.S. Maybe if I move to South Carolina, maybe I'll see it. But I've seen a lot of the American atheist community complaining about the rise of woke atheism. So I haven't experienced it, but I think there's a lot of people like shouting each other down. Like I can't give any specific examples because I'm not there and I really don't pay attention to it. But there's been some commentary that I've seen on social media about woke atheism. So like and sort of like the I wouldn't say factionalization. That's probably too strong of a word. But there's definitely like Thomas Sheedy who founded Atheists for Liberty, which is a right-wing atheist organization. So they go to the Republican CPACs and say, "Hey, not every Republican is a right-wing Christian. Hey, we're atheists and we're here too." And he gets some grief for going to going to the CPAC conventions. But I mean, I think it's brave. So yeah, I mean, like we're all human. So I mean, I don't see why we have to have problem. We should all be able to discuss things rationally.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and then this next one, if you had to abandon your worldview and adopt a new one, which one would you choose?
Well, I used to be like back when I was sort of in my deist to agnostic. I kind of went through. I wouldn't say it was Buddhist, but my belief system probably more closely approximated Buddhism. Like there was a website, I can't remember what it's still out there, but I can't remember what it's called. It's like they ask you like a series of questions and they correlate your beliefs. And I had done that like back around 2000, and it basically said, yeah, your outlook, you're kind of a Buddhist. So like
Mm,
because Buddhism tends to be more of a philosophy than a religion. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
cool.
but yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be anything. I just want to be a humanist, and do what I can to make the world a better place.
And then I guess, well, you mentioned this before, so this might be, because I said this question is, do you have a favorite atheist or least favorite atheist figure? And I assume your favorite atheist was Christopher Hitchens.
Favorite? He's definitely got away with words that, as a writer, I really appreciate. Like his ability to just encapsulate an idea and just bring it home is brilliant. Um, I mean, Richard Dawkins is great too. I mean, he gets accused a lot of being kind of strident by some people. I mean, I like Dawkins. I don't know. I've never really thought about it before. I think maybe I just liked Hitchens because I'm a writer and I like his writing style, and because I tend to be a sarcastic, have a really sarcastic sense of humor, and so does he. I think his writing style just appealed to me. So I would say, yeah, if I had to choose, it would probably be Christopher Hitchens. But as the atheist, I don't like. I don't know. Never really thought about it.
Have you heard of this very young atheist right now? He has a YouTube channel. It's called Cosmic Skeptic, and his name is Alex
Alex O'Connor.
O'Connor. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
I've
very
invited Alex to be. Yeah, I invited him to be on the podcast, but I hadn't heard back from him yet.
very fascinating
Yeah, I
guy.
like I like Alex. He's very smart. He's calm. Like when he's debating, like people like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, he's very calm. He doesn't get wrapped up in worked up. So he's really measured in his the way he comes across. So I like that.
Yeah, and Do you attend any type of like atheist conventions and stuff like that? Are you involved in any other clubs outside of this one?
Yeah, in back when I used to live in Hong Kong, we had a skeptics in the pub like every month. So we all used to get together like pre-COVID, even before COVID when I lived there. We would meet like every month and just kind of hang out. We originally just kind of started off as a monthly get together and drink and just hang out, and then we started doing talks, like some of the other skeptics in the pub. And I think I initiated. I think I was the first speaker. Um, So yeah, we did that here in Bangkok. Yeah, back when I first came here in 2016, when I was doing projects and I was just hanging out here, there was an active atheist group. It's been pretty dead. I just haven't really been that interested in getting it started. But yeah, when I was in Canada, I approached a group about talking to them when I was there, but I didn't hear back from them. So yeah, I mean, we tend to there's like every major city will have like an association and pretty much just like meet and greet. They might have
Hmm.
some interesting talks from time to time. So, but any of the major conventions, no, I've never been to. But if I move to South Carolina, some of the conventions in the US, I might make an attempt to go to some of them and maybe even be invited to be a speaker.
Yeah. Actually, I'm curious too, because your podcast. What was your favorite guest you've ever had?
Probably John Collins, he's a retired professor, Yale professor of Old Testament. Um, he's been so helpful to me. Like his books and his insights were like really, really helpful to me. So having a chat with him was really cool. Even like one of the comments from the former vice president of AAI, I think he commented on the video, but like, oh, this was like really, really good. Um, because like you kind of like, because I said I've been researching this stuff since like
Yeah.
2008. Um, so like I know this stuff backwards and forwards. I've got notes, I've got folders full of notes. Um, there's probably not many people on this planet that can talk to a professor of religion at their level, and like to really go into some of the detail of their books. So John it was fun, like just because I'd been talking to him for about 15 years. He even sent me a copy of his one of his books because I reached out to him. Um, this was about 2019. Yeah, it's about 5 years ago. I said, like, I've always kind of wondered, and like a Google search doesn't really turn anything up. Internet searches. I found if there's like, to give you an example, like I'm trying to figure out what books were in Spinoza's library when he died, and it's been cataloged, but I can't find it. And one of the professors that I deal with, he's like, you should be able to find that on the internet. But when you Google search for Spinoza's library, you just get a list of books that Spinoza wrote, not the books that were in his library. So I find that. So I asked John, I've always wondered, you keep hearing that the Christian the Christian ideas of what is a messianic passage in the Old Testament, like Isaiah 53, some of the other ones, like, the suffering servant. It's like, we all know, most of us anyway, people like me and you probably know, we know what the messianic passages that Christians claim predicted Jesus. But what are the actual messianic passages um, that the Jews think were actually messianic, like in the actual Jewish tradition? So he'd actually written a book on that called Scepter of the
Hmm.
Star that he actually sent me a PDF copy of his book. And then like he answered a couple of questions for me, like to try to clarify some of the points. So it was really interesting, like to have a conversation with him about how Judaism and beliefs have evolved. And I cite him all the time. Like, he's got a great quote. He's got several great quotes that I like one on the what's the word? The development of beliefs in an afterlife and how this was radically new in Judaism that, you know, prior to, so it emerges in Daniel chapter 12. So I don't know how familiar you are with the evolution of the biblical corpus. Daniel is widely considered to be the last book to be written. It was written around 165 BCE during the Maccabean Revolt. This is the Maccabean Revolt that Hitch refers to as terribly retarded. So the Maccabean Revolt was essentially the Jewish priests had the Maccabee family were Jewish priests, started a revolt because the sophisticated, educated, urban elite in Jerusalem were all Hellenistic Jews. So they were Greek, like they're influenced by Greek philosophy, because don't forget Alexander had come in the 300s and captured that region. So from the time of Alexander for 200 years, this area is under the control of the Greeks. And this is where Hitchens describes that the Maccabees won, and like tribal Jewish backwardness, basically retarded humanity. And so it's at this time that the book of Daniel is written. And that's the first mention of a resurrection and this idea. So what happens, this is what Collins explains in some of his books. This messianic idea is, and it was never Jesus. Like the Messiah just means anointed, right? So the king, the Davidic kings, like when you're like, King Charles just got, crowned. Like, so they anoint you with the oils. And that's all Messiah means. It just means the anointed. In five, when was it? 580, around 580 BC, roughly, the Babylonian exile, right? So the Babylonians come in to Judah and they exile the elites to Babylon. They kill in Jeremiah 22, or 23, it mentions, and it's contradictory, and that's where the Bible's a little bit weird, right? Because you have like these additions later that kind of contradict something before or after. So Jeremiah 22 and 23 kind of contradict each other. So I think it was Zedekiah, I think was like the last king of Judah, who was his, I can't remember if he was executed or he just died of old age, but like it mentions that the Babylonians had put his sons to death. Um, and then like Zedekiah was blinded, I think. So the the Davidic line is extinct. So the messianic call, and this is where Collins was really helpful to me, says you only see a messianic call in the time of the return. So when Cyrus the Great releases the Jews and they come back and they build the second temple. So in the period of Ezra, the priest Ezra, who's considered to be one of the editors and redactors of the Bible, in that time is Zerubbabel, which I had to ask John how to pronounce that because I thought, I totally butchered it. And he's like, it's Zerubbabel. I think like in Ezra and Nehemiah, like all of the messianic claims revolved around Zerubbabel, who was the exilarch, which is basically the patriarch of the exile. So whether he was a descendant of the Davidic kings or not, I don't know anybody really knows that. But all of these messianic expectations were entirely around the time of Zerubbabel in around, say, what, 400 something when Ezra and them they had come back from Babylon. I can't remember I can't remember exactly. It wasn't the Babylon exile wasn't very long. Like I think I think it was like less than a century from the time the Babylonian exile to Cyrus the Great defeating them. I think it was less than a cent, like only like 50 years, but I could be wrong. So Zerubbabel is all of these messianic hopes for a Davidic king to reconstitute the state of Israel. And then it goes dormant until basically until the time of the Maccabees, when it morphs. And Collins makes a great point that the Jewish culture, like the Maccabees, are seeing the existential extinction of Judaism. Like if we just become these Hellenistic Jews and we abandon Judaism for Hellenistic philosophy, so they're seeing like this existential extinction of Judaism. And what happens is in that time, the messianic belief flips from being a belief that a Davidic king will reconstitute the nation of Israel to it becomes a belief in the messianic kingdom in the afterlife. That when we die, that's when we get the kingdom. And this happens in the book of Daniel in chapter 12, where it mentions the resurrection. And this is what Collins is saying, is that these beliefs are radically new, and then it's what's really interesting is, so Christianity goes through the same thing. So Jesus is an end times preacher who's preaching, very openly preaching, and it's blatantly obvious if you read Mark carefully. Like Mark 9, Mark 13, thou shalt not taste death till my Father's kingdom is come. Jesus is very, very clearly enunciating an end times message in his lifetime. But Christianity undergoes exactly the same messianic flip that Judaism had done 200 years before. That it goes from being a kingdom on earth to becoming a kingdom of the afterlife. Interestingly, and I think it wasn't Collins, it was another Catholic professor, T.J. Ray, and her book, The Birth of Satan, talked about like Satan also emerges the same period and during the Maccabean revolt. Satan himself is emerging in the apocalyptic literature of the era, where in the book of Job he's has to be unleashed by God, but finally at the end, in this around the time of Daniel, Satan is evolving into an independent character, and that this idea of heaven and hell, it comes into Judaism and quickly goes right back out again. Not before Christianity picks it up, and then the Muslims pick it up again 500 years later. So it comes into Judaism just long enough to get picked up by Christianity and Islam, and then goes right back out of fashion. So Jews no longer believe in hell and an afterlife. There might be some sects of Judaism that do, but by and large, Jews, that was a very, right around the time of Jesus, a very short-lived Jewish belief that there would actually be an afterlife where they would go to heaven and be with God. And that was an existential reaction to the Maccabean revolt and this Hellenization of Judaism.
And this John Collins guy, he's kind of like a Bart Ehrman, where he's like a biblical scholar but an atheist.
No, he's an Old Testament. So Ehrman is a New Testament scholar. Collins is an Old Testament scholar. He's retired now, so he's professor emeritus. So he's retired, but he was. It was interesting when I had my chat with him that he was talking about his youth, and he had actually been a monk, and it was the monastery that sent him to university and educated him, and he still considers himself as a faithful Catholic. So, but he's a scholar of the Old Testament. So
interesting. Okay, cool. And then, what is something you wish religious people understood better about atheists?
That we're not evil, that we're not immoral, and that we don't need religion to be moral. There's actually I'm working on a section, so I'm working on a new book right now. I'm really close to being done. It's on the history of the Catholic Church and all of their sins. And in 2000, March 12th, 2000, they had the Day of Pardon as part of the Jubilee year for the Catholic Church, in which they apologized for a number of sins the church had committed. And in one of them, which really pissed me off, and I actually wrote this in my analysis, like this is like the evils of the modern world, including atheism, secularism. I'm like, really? This is evil in your twisted little theistic mind. Like, you cannot see past your own theistic bias to see that secularism and atheism are not evil, and that, most secular humanists or most atheists have a secular humanist approach that, and he even said, I have the book open. Let me just, because the quote really annoyed the crap out of me. The way it was phrased. Where is it? Yes, the disregard for the poor in many countries. So this is what I wrote. While apologizing with one hand, with the other, the Pope blatantly attacks the evils of atheism, secularism, and religious indifference. Once again, the Church cannot just simply apologize, but there must always be some recourse to reactionary dogma. And then I told him, what was that up here? Yes. This perspective lays bare the blatant theistic bias of the churchmen and totally overlooks the humanist ideals advocated by many secularists. So that just annoyed the crap out of me, that this is 20 years ago that the Catholic Church is apologizing for all of its sins. And then in the same breath, they turn around and they talk about the evils of atheism and how we don't care about the poor. I'm like, well, that's not true at all. That's just more of their rhetorical bullshit. So, and they just cannot they just cannot get out of their own way. And I've been talking lately. So I had an interview, one of the most recent AAI podcasts. Have you heard of the Clergy Project?
Yeah.
So the Clergy Project was started by the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the US. And it's essentially for clergy who no longer believe, but they need counseling, right? These people, they have jobs that they depend on. They have families who, so a lot of these non-believing clergy need a lot of help. They need counseling on how to find job retraining, on how to deal with, their families that they're going to alienate. So I'd interviewed three former clergy. One was, I think, a Lutheran. One was Adventist. Yeah, and the other one was a Catholic priest. He was a monk and a priest. And same as John. He had joined the Benedictines, who then sent him to university to train him. Um, and he's like one of the reasons he left was the same thing that bugs me, is that the Catholic Church just cannot stop spewing its own rhetoric. That we are the only true belief. There's no salvation outside the church. We're going to apologize for our sins, but then we're going to turn around and we're going to like spew all this nonsense about evil atheists and don't care about poor people. And it's just like, can you just stop with all the rhetoric and just be a normal human being for once and just
Mhm.
apologize for all the shit you've done?
Okay. And I'm assuming this hasn't happened to you, but have you ever experienced something paranormal or supernatural?
No.
Okay. And back to the space conversation, what are your thoughts on aliens?
I think statistically it's unlikely that we are alone. You might like this as because you're a Christian apologist. So I did a meme several years ago called the theory of special Christian relativity, that the Christian belief that you must believe in Jesus. So how are alien species who are part of God's grand design? These alien species have never heard of Christianity. They've never heard of this itinerant first century Jewish earth preacher to know the truth to be saved. So how would alien species, if Christianity is true, then every alien species and every non-Christian on Earth is doomed.
Yeah, I've had that conversation a lot since I'm also an aliens apologist to some degree because I think they're real 100%. But that's been a question I've tossed out to Christians amongst my community, what the essence of aliens are or what they could be in terms of from like a biblical lens. Because to me, I think that there's something outside of the spiritual realm or any type of I think it's likely they're outside of any type of Christian lens, meaning that they can't be demonic or angelic or anything like that. And I think there's something completely different. It's just a matter of what they could possibly be. Because I don't know if you read about or heard about the recent stuff in the news with all this new stuff coming about these pilots seeing these absurd UFOs in the sky. I think one described it as a black cube inside of a translucent sphere flying through the sky, other shapes and sizes all over, that the government's hiding some kind of secret program that has these crafts and doing some kind of reverse engineering on them to find out what they are and their origins. This could all be completely nonsense, or it could all be true. But regardless, it very much sounds like it could be true, depending on the fact that they have all these new witnesses coming out, all independent of each other and whatnot, even having congressional hearings on top of it. But yeah,
Well, I mean,
interesting stuff.
they could be observing us. They just don't want to talk to us because we're such a warlike, moronic species. We can't stop killing each other over stupid shit. So maybe they just don't want to talk to us. They're just observing and waiting until we mature enough that they want to make contact.
Yeah, it goes back to that meme with the whole aliens lock their car doors when they drive past Earth, something like that.
Mm.
But cool.
I
And the
like I
next
like
one,
the one I like the cartoon of the dinosaurs coming back and saying, "I hope the monkeys didn't touch anything."
oh, that's good. Uh, and then this one is, does atheism serve you purpose?
I don't think atheism per se has a purpose. Like you said, it's just a lack of belief. So it doesn't do anything for me. By not believing, I'm definitely freed of a lot of mental baggage that I used to have, like fear of hell and fear of judgment, things like that. So I'm definitely, I don't, was it I don't know if you've heard of Daryl Ray. He founded Recovering from Religion and the Secular Therapy Project. So I did a show with him recently too. And I can't remember if it was on the show or we were just chatting. I'm pretty sure it was Daryl. So Daryl deals a lot with the recovering and the secular therapy, right? Is because religion has damaged many people, like the religious trauma, I think is the term they use. Um, and I was like, yeah, I didn't come out of it with any trauma. And I'm pretty sure it was Daryl. He's like, you're damn lucky, because a lot of people don't come out of it unscathed. That I basically came out of it and was able to shed it, and not have that guilt and stuff. So, like one of the I had a friend. So Daryl's a clinical psychologist. One of my we didn't really date. Anyway, she was a clinical psychologist, and I remember vividly having this conversation with her. She had a patient who was dealing with this traumatic Christian guilt that Satan was out to get him. You know, and the previous counselor had been a Christian who fed this delusion rather than helping him, fed this delusion. And I talked to Daryl about this, and he goes, "Yeah, unfortunately, this happens more often than you would think. That the American Psychological Association or whatever APA, whatever they're called, does not have any standards or any standards that they can enforce, right? Because I guess it's a voluntary association you join. That they don't really have any standards that you cannot push your own religious agenda on your patients." And I remember mentioning this to Daryl, and he's like, "Yeah, that's not uncommon that you'll have theistic counselors who will feed these delusions instead of helping their patients."
Mm, okay. And then this last question is, what question, if there's any, is the hardest for you to answer in response to a theist that they'll maybe push on you or ask you?
No, I take all questions. I don't think there's any specific question that I wouldn't answer. So I think I could argue pretty much any point that they try to make, and I have done in the past. So
Mm.
as I said, I just tend to get frustrated because like you just run into this wall of to be really doing well, they're stupid. Like they just won't listen. Like, they are completely boxed in by, well, the Bible says. I'm like, yeah, well, Spider-Man says, I mean, you can write anything in a book. Doesn't make it true. So
Cool.
I think that's probably
Any,
it's frustrating, like to run into that kind of intransigence. And, frankly, it's intellectual dishonesty. I think that's probably more frustrating than anything. But, I don't think there's any points that I wouldn't or couldn't rebut, with some. And this is where Hitchens was really good. Like Hitchens was just a master at like just razor sharp, you know, um, prose in taking down, arguments.
do you do you know of an atheist named Dan Barker?
Oh yeah, he's the one of the co-founders of Freedom from Religion that
Yeah.
that also created the Clergy Project.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That
He
makes
was a
sense.
pen, he was a Pentecostal minister in his former life before he became
Yeah.
one of the founders of Freedom from Religion.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then do you have any final words? Anything else you want to
You gonna come over to our team soon?
say? That's funny. Well, you know what? I really appreciate this, man. Let me hold on one second. Let me, there we go.